The city buzzed with activity. Cars honked. People hustled past each other, caught up in the rush of their daily lives. Meetings, deadlines, and errands filled their thoughts. Yet amidst this storm of noise and chaos, something cut through. A guitar. Not just an ordinary street performance, but a sound that stopped everything. The music was raw, unfiltered, and real. It didn't just float in the background. It demanded attention. The kind of guitar playing that spoke directly to your soul. The kind of sound that made you pause, even if just for a second. Marcus Johnson, a black music producer with a keen ear for talent, was no stranger to the hustle of the industry. He had deals to close, talent to scout, and places to be. But as he walked down the street, something made his steps slow down. He couldn't explain it at first, but the music pulled him in. The sound led him to the corner of the sidewalk where, between two buildings, sat an older man. His clothes were worn, his boots weathered, and his face showed the signs of a life that had seen better days. He was in his late 50s or early 60s, yet his hands moved with the grace of someone much younger. The guitar was old, its wood cracked in places, but the way he played, it was magic. Passers-by didn't even notice. A woman glanced at him but quickly looked away. A man in a business suit stepped over the guitar case without a second thought. Teenagers snickered and moved along. But Marcus, he didn't walk past. He stood there, frozen, as if the music had a grip on him. The music climbed and fell, heavy with emotion and history. It wasn't just a song, it was a story. And yet no one seemed to care, except for Marcus. He felt it deep inside, this connection to something bigger than just a man on the street with a guitar. Without thinking, Marcus moved closer. He crouched down, intrigued. He had seen countless musicians in his career, but this felt different. The way the man's fingers moved over the strings, the raw emotion in his voice, it was something he couldn't ignore. That was something else, Marcus said, his voice full of admiration. The older man looked up, squinting against the sun. His face was tired, his eyes dark with the weight of years. "You play like that a long time?" Marcus asked. The man chuckled softly. "Once, a long time ago, another life." Silence hung between them, thick with the untold story. But Marcus couldn't walk away, not this time. "What's your name?" he asked. The man exhaled a long breath, as if saying his name was like admitting something painful. "It's Jack," he muttered almost to himself. Marcus nodded, absorbing the weight of that name. "You ever record any music?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Jack paused, his fingers still on the guitar strings, his expression hardening. "Once," he said softly. "A long time ago." "What happened?" Marcus asked, sensing the pain in Jack's voice. Jack's gaze drifted to the ground, and for a moment he seemed lost in his thoughts. "Bad deals, bad people. I trusted the wrong ones," he said bitterly. "Ended up with nothing." Marcus could feel the depth of Jack's words, the years of pain and regret buried beneath them. "You still got it," Marcus said, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. Jack looked up at him, his eyes searching Marcus's face. "Still got what?" Jack asked, his voice guarded. "Your talent," Marcus said, his voice firm. "You can still play, Jack. You can still sing. You just need the right chance." Jack laughed softly, a sound full of cynicism. "A chance? At my age? In this world?" But Marcus was serious. He didn't back down. "Let's see," he said, pulling out his phone. "Let's see what happens." Jack stared at him, unsure. But then with a shrug, he let his hands return to the guitar. He began to play again. But this time Marcus was listening carefully. This wasn't just playing. This was Jack's soul spilling into the music. The melody was haunting, full of pain and beauty. It was raw, unrefined, and so genuine. It was as if every note carried a story, and Marcus could feel it, deep in his chest. People on the street started to slow down, noticing the music. Some stopped, others took out their phones. The first few dollars dropped into the guitar case, a small token, but Marcus was watching the views on his phone climb. The video was starting to go viral. The comments were flooding in. People wanted to know who this man was. Where could they find his music? Marcus turned the screen toward Jack, a grin spreading across his face. "You just hit 50,000 views in 10 minutes, he said. Jack blinked, confused. Is that good? Marcus laughed, shaking his head. It's insane, Jack. This is huge. Jack didn't know what to say. This wasn't just some street performance. This was the beginning of something. As the video continued to spread like wildfire, Jack's past, his name, was slowly resurfacing. And soon Marcus received a message that made his heart race. Vince Holloway, a name Jack had not spoken in years. You ever hear of Vince Holloway? Marcus asked, glancing at Jack. Jack's face tightened. He knew that name all too well. Yeah, he muttered. I know him. Marcus could see the change in Jack's face. His eyes darkened, a flicker of pain passing through them. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Vince, huh? Jack started, his voice hoarse. He's the one who took everything from me. What do you mean? Marcus asked softly, trying to understand the depth of the pain Jack was holding on to. Jack exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the table. We were best friends once, he muttered. We played together, wrote songs together. But when things started to take off for him, he changed. He sold us out? Marcus asked, the bitterness in his voice matching the tension in Jack's tone. Jack nodded slowly, his hands clenching into fists. Yeah, he said quietly. He signed away my rights, took credit for everything I did. And when I tried to fight back, I was out. Marcus shook his head, feeling the weight of Jack's words. That's messed up, he muttered. But you're not out. Not anymore. Jack's gaze met Marcus's, searching for sincerity. What are you saying? He asked, his voice guarded. I'm saying I can help you, Marcus said, his voice firm. You've still got it, Jack. People are noticing you. You just need the right person in your corner. Jack stared at him for a moment, weighing the offer. And what do you get out of this? Jack asked, his voice sharp. Marcus chuckled softly. I get to say I helped a real artist make a comeback. Jack raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. A comeback? He asked. I'm a joke on the street. Who's going to care about me? You'd be surprised, Marcus said. People care about real music. And trust me, they'll care about you. Jack shook his head, unsure, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. All right, let's do it, Jack finally said, his voice full of reluctance but also determination. But don't expect me to be some star, Marcus. I'm just a man with a guitar. That's all you need to be, Marcus said with a smile. Just keep playing, Jack. Let the world hear your story. Jack arrived at the small studio, his hands shaking slightly as he stepped inside. The familiar smell of old wood and the soundproof walls made him hesitate. It had been years since he'd stepped into a place like this, his fingers clenched around his guitar case. I don't know about this, Marcus, he said, his voice uncertain. Marcus gave him a reassuring smile. Just trust me. This is where it all starts. He led Jack through the room, pointing out the vintage instruments that lined the walls, each one with its own history. Jack's eyes softened for a moment as he noticed the guitars. I used to play on guitars like these, he muttered. Well, today's a new day, Marcus said, his voice firm but kind. Pick up your guitar, Jack. Let's see what you've got left. Jack hesitated, but after a deep breath, he placed his guitar on the stand and sat down. His fingers hovered above the strings for a moment before he finally began to play. The first few notes were shaky, tentative, as if his hands were unsure of themselves. But then something clicked. The melody started to flow, raw and powerful. Jack closed his eyes, letting the music take over. It was like he had found himself again, the man he used to be before everything fell apart. Marcus stood behind the glass, his arms crossed, watching intently. He could see the transformation in Jack. The hesitation was gone. This was real. Jack wasn't just playing music, he was living it. The raw emotion in every chord spoke to Marcus. He had seen many musicians, but none like this. The session went on for hours, but Jack didn't notice the time passing. His guitar became an extension of himself, the music an outpouring of every moment of pain, loss, and hope that had built up inside him over the years. Each note was a release, each chord a story. When the last chord rang out, the room was silent. Jack opened his eyes, looking toward the glass. Marcus was still standing there, arms crossed, but there was a glint of admiration in his eyes. That was something else, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Jack let out a shaky laugh, his hands trembling. I didn't think I still had it in me. Marcus smiled. You've still got it, Jack. You just needed to remember who you were. Jack looked down at his guitar, a hint of disbelief on his face. Later that evening, as they left the studio, Marcus pulled out his phone. I have an idea, he said, glancing at Jack. Let's give the world a taste of what you've got, a real taste. Jack raised an eyebrow, still skeptical. What do you mean? Marcus tapped a few buttons on his phone. We're posting this, he said, showing Jack the screen. I'm going to put this on the internet and let people decide. No labels, no gimmicks, just real music. Jack hesitated, but then something in him shifted. He knew this was his chance, his real chance. He nodded. All right, let's do it. Jack's heart raced as Marcus hit the post button. The video was up. It was just a short clip of Jack playing in the studio, but there was something raw about it that felt different from anything else. There was no flashy editing, no filter, just pure music. Here we go, Marcus muttered, watching the screen as the video began to load. At first, there were only a few views. No comments, no shares. It was typical. After all, no one knew who Jack was. But then, something unexpected happened. A comment appeared, then another, then a share. The numbers began to rise. Slowly at first, but then faster. The phone buzzed in Marcus's hand, signaling the growing interest. This is insane, Marcus said, his eyes wide. Jack, do you know what this means? Jack stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. I think so, he said slowly, still not fully believing it. The views kept climbing, and the comments flooded in, people asking who this mysterious musician was, where they could hear more, and why he wasn't already famous. A few minutes later, the video hit 100,000 views, then 500,000. By the time they reached the coffee shop down the block, it was at 1 million views. This is crazy, Jack said, his voice trembling. He couldn't believe it. It was happening. He was back. It's just the beginning, Marcus replied, eyes glued to his phone. Wait until it goes viral. Jack didn't understand what Marcus meant by viral, but he could see the numbers climbing and the excitement building in the room. People were noticing. I just got a message, Marcus said, his voice now a bit more serious, from Vince Holloway. Jack froze. His hand tightened around his coffee cup. Vince. That name brought a sharp pain in his chest. It had been years, but the bitterness never left. Vince was the man who had taken everything from him. The betrayal still stung like it happened yesterday. What does he want? Jack asked, his voice low, cold. He wants to talk, Marcus said, and he knows about the video. Jack's face darkened. I bet he does, he muttered. He's probably just looking for another way to use me. Marcus didn't argue. He understood. But this time something was different. Jack could feel it. After a few seconds of hesitation, Jack exhaled. Fine. Let's see what he has to say. Marcus nodded and made the call. Jack's mind was racing. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he was about to face the man who had haunted his past. Jack walked into the small studio, his heart pounding in his chest. The smell of wood and dust filled the air, a stark contrast to the neon lights of the city. It felt like another lifetime ago when he had been here, making music that mattered. But today, everything was different. Today, he had a second chance. As he stepped inside, he saw Vince waiting near the mixing desk, a look of uncertainty in his eyes. Vince hadn't changed much, still the same man Jack remembered. The years had taken their toll, but there was something different in the way he carried himself. Vince's eyes met Jack's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with history, with memories of everything that had gone wrong. Then Vince finally spoke, his voice rough but sincere. I'm sorry, Jack, he said, his words heavy with regret. I screwed up. I made choices that hurt you, and I can never take that back. Jack didn't know what to say. For so long, he had carried the anger and bitterness inside him, feeding it with every mistake Vince had made. But now, hearing Vince admit his fault, the anger started to dissolve, replaced by something else, something he couldn't quite name. I don't know what you want me to say, Vince, Jack replied, his voice steady but cold. You took everything from me. My name, my music, my life. He paused, his eyes narrowing. Why should I trust you now? Vince took a deep breath, his eyes dark with regret. I can't change what I did, he said quietly, but I can try to make it right. I still have the rights to your songs, Jack, and I want to give them back to you. I want to fix this, even if it's just a little. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. Jack stared at the folder Vince had placed on the table, containing the rights to his music. It was all there, everything he had lost. He could feel the weight of it, the years of pain, the regrets, but he also felt something else, a spark of hope. This isn't forgiveness, Vince, Jack said, his voice soft but firm. Not yet, at least. But I'll take it. Not for you, but for me. He reached forward, his hand trembling slightly as he took the folder from Vince. It was a small step, but it was something, a beginning. Vince nodded, his eyes filled with something Jack hadn't expected. Guilt, yes, but also relief. Jack could see the weight lifting off his shoulders, even if just a little. For the first time in years, Vince seemed like a man who might be able to redeem himself. Thank you, Jack, Vince said quietly. Jack didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked out of the studio, feeling the weight of the folder in his hand, the weight of the past lifting just a little. This was the beginning of something new, a chance at redemption. Jack stepped into the bright lights of the stage for the first time in over 2 decades. The crowd was roaring, a sea of faces staring at him. This wasn't the street corner where he'd played his music for spare change. This was different. This was his moment. The stage was massive, but Jack felt a sense of calm. He adjusted the strap of his guitar, his fingers brushing the familiar worn wood. This was the same guitar he'd played all those years ago, the same guitar that had carried him through highs and lows. The first note rang out, clear and powerful, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The audience was silent, hanging on every chord, every word that Jack sang. He poured everything into that song, his struggles, his heartbreak, his redemption. As Jack sang, he could feel the weight lifting off his shoulders, the burden of the past finally starting to fade. This wasn't just a performance, it was a catharsis. The years of regret, of betrayal, were being released with every note. The crowd erupted into applause as the song came to an end. Jack closed his eyes for a brief second, letting the sound wash over him. It felt surreal, but it was real. This was his comeback, and the world was listening. Cameron stood backstage, arms crossed, a proud smile on his face. He had known Jack had it in him, but this was beyond what he had imagined. Jack was back, and this time, he wasn't going anywhere. Vince was there too, watching from the side, his face unreadable. He had been with Jack for years, but now seeing him on stage again, something had shifted. Jack had taken back what was his, and he wasn't going to let it go again. As Jack took a bow, he saw the faces in the crowd, people who had supported him from the very beginning, and those who had just discovered him through his viral video. He realized something. This was bigger than music. This was about redemption, about the power of second chances. The lights dimmed as the crowd cheered, and Jack stood there, taking it all in. This was only the beginning. There were still songs to be written, stories to be told. But for the first time in years, Jack knew he was finally where he was meant to be.